Well, hello. Now, today we'll be talking about the Eucharistic prayers. Now, if you'll allow me to be a little bit didactic, my lecture will be based on my thesis that the current 13 options that we have their roots in the language of Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, Old English to Modern English as they move from each millennia over the past 4,000 years. So, wait, did the lights just go dim? Oh, I see, it was the lights in your eyes that suddenly glazed over. You were wondering, we came early for Mass for this? Now, to be fair, I did see a couple of you whose eyes lit up about a lecture, and I saw you. You know, if your eyes lit up, you're an outlier, or an anomaly. I know this because I'm an outlier too. Lecture nerds will always find each other. So let me try again. I want to take you back to July 2nd, 2022. Now you're wondering, we went from 4,000 years to 6 months? Can't this guy settle on something that makes sense? Well, bear with me a bit. I'm probably going to circle the runway a few times, but I promise that I will land this plane on the Eucharistic prayers. So again, I want to take you back to July the 2nd, 2022. Father John Peter officially came to us the day before on July the 1st. When he heard that Deacon Fidel wasn't available to celebrate the Spanish baptisms on Saturday, Father immediately volunteered to preside at the baptisms. This impressed me. I was even more impressed at the baptisms. Now, at most baptisms, there's going to be babies and older brothers and sisters, usually toddlers, and during the ceremony, some of the babies and toddlers began to act like babies and toddlers, growing restless, fidgeting, even crying. Now, you could see that some of the mothers and grandmothers were becoming anxious about the kids disrupting with our new priest, and a couple of them were on the way to take the kids out into the vestibule. And Father John Peter stopped them with these words: "When babies and little children cry and fidget in church, they aren't distracting us. This is how they pray and dance before the Lord. When they cry and fidget in church, they're showing us that we should dance and pray to the Lord." I think these words should be posted in the vestibule and in the choir room. Like I said, I was impressed. This reminds me of a story. A young couple were bringing their newborn baby son, Chuck, home for the first time. Now, his older sister, Katie, probably 3 or 4, was looking at him with a look of awe and what looked a little bit like skepticism. She followed him into the baby's room. Now, as they put Chuck down into the crib, Katie asked to be left alone with him. His parents were a little bit concerned. They've heard that sometimes older brothers and sisters can be jealous of the little brothers and sisters. But Katie insisted that she needed to be alone with Chuck. Now, her parents agreed, since they had a baby monitor, so they'd be able to hear everything that was going on and be right outside the door. And this is what they heard through the monitor: "I know you were just with him. You have to tell me what God looks like. I'm starting to forget what God looks like." The great theologian Karl Rahner wrote that everyone has been created with a desire to know God. To know God, not just about God. St. John Paul II said that the primary aim of all catechesis is to put people in communion, in intimacy with Christ. So Pope Francis has asked us to remember that we encounter Christ at the Mass, and not just learn about Christ. Words matter, so stay with me. I'm going to take another circle around that runway. Words that inform speak to the mind. Words that transform speak to the heart. God told us that He wanted us to give us a new heart, not a new mind. So going back to that wedding courtship analogy that we've been using, I'd like you to remember a time when you fell in love. I'm willing to bet you didn't fall in love by exchanging biographies or resumes. No, you fell in love by spending time together, probably with music in the background as you opened up your heart to one another. Now I'd like to think about when you were 4 or 5 years old. I realize that for some of us that's a long trip that might require a layover. But remember, when you were in kindergarten or maybe first grade, when you first learned a new song, remember the joy when you sang it together. Do you still remember the words of some of them? I know that I do. Feel that joy again. Okay, now remember the vocabulary words that were on the spelling test that week, on week 5. Not so easy, is it? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure you'd be able to pass the test. But learning is good. We have many opportunities for learning here, and it can help transformation. but it doesn't always lead to transformation. Now I'd like to remember a time when words moved you. Maybe it was a song that stirred you. Perhaps a patriotic song or a hymn that you heard in church. Could have been a song that played in the radio that you heard when you were falling in love. Go back in time to that time. Music has a way of doing this. This is why singing is the norm of the Mass. Not just for the hymns, but for the prayers and the readings too. Maybe you were stirred by poetry, perhaps something from Shakespeare. Maybe you were stirred when Martin Luther King was telling us about his dream at the Lincoln Memorial. My point is that words that transform will usually come to us as music, or poetry, or oratory. I'm going to add another category to those words that is meant to transform, and that is prayer. When we pray, we aren't trying to transform God, but us. After all, Christ didn't come to the world to change God's idea about us, but to change our ideas about God. Every week at Mass, we listen to words of transportation, but we don't always hear them. This can be especially true of the Eucharistic prayers. I told you I'd eventually land this plane. The Eucharistic prayers are meant to literally and figuratively transform, not just the bread and the wine, but to transform us. So next week we'll go through some of those words that transform, and I promise we won't go through all 13 prayers. We'll explore the poetry of prayer. Hopefully it'll be a more direct flight. I'll be back next week as we continue our hero's journey through the Eucharist. My name is Dave, and I'm not in charge.